10 weirdest 1960s cartoon characters you forgot existed. They say the 1960s gave us peace, love, and rock and roll. But hidden in Saturday morning reels was a stranger legacy. Cartoons so bizarre, so out of step, they could only have been born in that psychedelic decade. These weren't just characters. They were fever dreams with theme songs. And here's the question. Do you remember them? Or has your mind erased them for good reason? Stick around, because what you're about to hear will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about cartoons. The Great Gazoo. Picture this. Bedrock, the Stone Age town of brontosaurus cranes and foot-powered cars. Everything makes sense in its own caveman logic, until, without warning, a floating green alien in a space helmet appears. The Great Gazoo. Dropped into the Flintstones in 1965 like some intergalactic party crasher, Gazoo was banished from his home planet for bad behavior and forced to serve Fred and Barney. Now here's the twist. This wasn't just a character, it was a network experiment. The show was slipping in ratings, and the creators thought a space alien might hook kids already dreaming of rockets and moon landings. Did it work? Not exactly. Kids loved him, parents rolled their eyes, and critics scratched their heads. Imagine a prehistoric sitcom suddenly invaded by something straight out of the Jetsons. Gazoo had futuristic gadgets, do-it-all devices that turned Bedrock into a sci-fi playground. He'd appear in a puff of smoke, call Fred Dum-Dum, and meddle in their problems with cosmic solutions that usually backfired. He wasn't just odd, he was out of place, a symbol of television's restless chase for the next big thing. Did you know? In syndication, some stations actually cut Gazoo's episodes, trying to preserve the Flintstones' Stone Age vibe. That's how divisive he was. But here's the irony. Decades later, Gazoo became a cult icon, even popping up in Flintstones commercials and video games. So why does he linger in memory? Because he's proof that even in the comfort food of animation, weirdness slips in. And Gazoo was more than a punchline. He was a neon green reminder that television was always willing to gamble on the bizarre. Milton the Monster. Now let's shift from space helmets to bubbling cauldrons. In 1965, kids tuned into the Milton the Monster show, expecting chills, but what they got was something far stranger. Milton was supposed to be a Frankenstein-style monster, stitched together in a lab on top of Horror Hill. But the twist? His creators accidentally poured in way too much tincture of tenderness. Instead of a terror, Milton turned into the friendliest, goofiest, soft-hearted monster you could imagine. Think about the timing. This was the decade of the Munsters and the Addams Family, where spooky was played for laughs. Milton fit the mold, but took it even further. His flat head and stitched-up smile looked spooky, but the moment he opened his mouth, out came a silly, bumbling voice that made him more marshmallow than menace. Every week, Milton faced misadventures not with growls or roars, but with cheerful optimism. He wasn't just a parody of horror, he was an antidote to it, and that's what made him so weird. Here was a monster show that refused to be scary. It leaned into innocence at a time when most cartoons still flirted with slapstick chaos. Did you know? Milton's show included other characters like Fearless Fly, a superhero insect with special glasses, and Fluky Luke, a bumbling lawman. In a way, it was less a monster show and more a surreal variety pack. Milton the Monster may not have lasted long, but his image, big, goofy, stitched up, and smiling, was unforgettable. He's the cartoon equivalent of Halloween candy that turns out to be bubblegum, sweet, strange, and utterly out of step with his horror roots. Fearless Fly. In the mid-1960s, superheroes were everywhere. Comic books, television, even breakfast cereal mascots were sprouting capes and masks. But leave it to animation to give us one of the strangest caped crusaders of all time, Fearless Fly. He wasn't born in a radioactive lab, and he wasn't an alien from another planet. No, Fearless Fly was just Hiram, a scrawny, nerdy insect who lived like any other bug until he put on his oversized red glasses. That's right. His superpowers came not from muscles, but from eyewear. Slip them on, and suddenly Hiram could lift cars, battle villains, and zip through the air like Superman's tiny cousin. Why glasses? The creators of the Milton the Monster show thought it would be funny to parody Clark Kent in reverse. Instead of hiding his identity with glasses, Hiram needed them to reveal his true strength. A clever twist, sure, but also undeniably weird. Every episode, Fearless Fly squared off against bizarre villains with names as ridiculous as their schemes. His battles weren't epic struggles. They were slapstick skirmishes, where buzzing sound effects and goggle-eyed expressions were half the fun. And yet, to kids watching on black and white sets, it all felt larger than life. Did you know? Fearless Fly's segments often overshadowed Milton himself. Some kids tuned in just for the bug in tights, and decades later, animation historians would marvel at how Fearless Fly was both a spoof and a sincere attempt at superhero storytelling. Fearless Fly may not have had the fame of Batman or Spider-Man, but he had something else: sheer oddity. A superhero who couldn't fight crime without his glasses. That's not just weird, it's pure 60s genius. Batfink, from bugs to bats. Another winged wonder soared across the 1960s airwaves. Batfink. Premiering in 1966, this pint-sized parody of Batman had one unforgettable catchphrase: "My wings are like a shield of steel." And every time he said it, you either laughed or groaned. Batfink wasn't your typical superhero. He wasn't dark, brooding, or mysterious. Instead, he was a gray bat with giant metallic wings that clanged whenever they blocked bullets. His sidekick, Karate, a clumsy but loyal martial artist whose name alone tells you everything about the show's sense of humor. The series was a satire, poking fun at the superhero craze while still delivering Saturday morning thrills. But what made it so odd was its tone. It couldn't decide if it wanted to be serious or silly. One minute, Batfink was dramatically swooping down on criminals. The next, he was trapped in a pun-filled gag. The villains? Forgettable but bizarre, with names like Hugo Agogo, a mad scientist straight out of a comic strip fever dream. Did you know? Batfink episodes were only 5 minutes long, designed as quick bursts between other shows. That brevity made it even stranger. You'd get a dose of campy superhero antics, then suddenly switch back to something entirely different. It was like flipping through channels inside a single cartoon. Though short-lived, Batfink stuck in the minds of anyone who heard that clanging line about his shield of steel. In fact, the phrase became so iconic that later parodies and internet jokes brought Batfink back into the spotlight. Looking back, Batfink wasn't just a cartoon. It was a time capsule of the 1960s obsession with capes, gadgets, and crime fighting, filtered through the lens of absurd comedy. He wasn't Batman. He wasn't even close. But he was unforgettable in his own peculiar way. Super President. What if I told you that in 1967, kids turned on their TV sets and watched the President of the United States moonlight as a superhero? Sounds like satire, right? But no. This was Super President, an actual cartoon that blended politics with comic book absurdity. The concept: James Norcross, a perfectly ordinary U.S. president by day, transformed into Super President when trouble struck. And his powers? Not subtle. He could turn his body into steel, marble, granite, or even pure energy. One minute he's giving a speech, the next he's morphing into a walking statue to fight criminals. The show treated this wild premise with complete sincerity. The commander-in-chief piloted a high-tech rocket called Air Force One, had a secret base, and took on intergalactic villains when he wasn't attending cabinet meetings. For children of the 60s, it was a strange mashup of civics class and superhero fantasy. Did you know? The cartoon was quickly pulled after critics called it inappropriate, worrying that mixing presidential authority with comic book antics blurred some uncomfortable lines. Some parents found it bizarre, even unsettling. But that's exactly why it lingers in memory today. It was so audacious, so unusual, that you can't help but marvel at the idea. Looking back, Super President is less about superheroics and more about television's endless appetite for experimentation. The 60s were a time when anything seemed possible. And here was proof: a president as a superhero, only in Saturday morning animation. Cool McCool. Swinging trench coat, drooping mustache, and a voice that sounded halfway between suave and sleepy, that was Cool McCool. Debuting in 1966, this animated spy spoof leaned hard into the spy craze sparked by James Bond and the man from UNCLE. But McCool wasn't slick. He was a disaster in a trench coat. Every mission turned into slapstick chaos. He'd chase down villains with names like the Owl or Dr. Madcap, only to fall into his own traps. His gadgets? They usually malfunctioned. His disguises? Paper thin. The running gag was simple. McCool wanted to be James Bond, but he ended up more like Inspector Clouseau with a secret agent badge. The design matched the tone, angular psychedelic visuals with groovy sound effects and a jazzy theme song that insisted he was cool McCool. The problem? He wasn't cool at all, and that's exactly what made him unforgettable. Did you know? The series came from Bob Kane, co-creator of Batman. That's right, the same mind that gave us The Dark Knight also unleashed this bumbling spy on Saturday mornings. Kane reportedly saw McCool as a way to cash in on the spy boom, but instead, he created one of the strangest anti-heroes in cartoon history. Cool McCool lasted only a short time, but his bizarre charm earned him cult status. He was proof that the 1960s could make even the sleekest genre, spies and espionage, look ridiculous with the right amount of exaggeration. Cool McCool never cracked a case with brilliance, but he cracked audiences up with his endless pratfalls. In a decade where style was everything, McCool was the clumsy spy who couldn't quite keep his tie straight, and that's why he remains lodged in the memory of anyone who ever stumbled upon his misadventures. The Impossibles. The year was 1966, and television was bursting with superhero fever. But Hanna-Barbera, never content with ordinary ideas, decided to mix two of the decade's biggest obsessions, rock and roll bands and superheroes. The result? The Impossibles, a Saturday morning cartoon about three guitar-slinging musicians who doubled as costumed crime fighters. Their alter egos? Coil Man, who could stretch and spring like a human slinky. Fluid Man, who turned himself into liquid to slide through keyholes and drains. And Multi-Man, who cloned himself into an army of duplicates. Together, they'd play bubblegum rock concerts for adoring fans, only to vanish mid-gig and reappear in spandex, ready to stop villains with names as campy as their own. The formula was pure 60s, music, gadgets, and zany villains with outrageous schemes. It was also a little surreal. Imagine tuning in for what looks like the Monkees, only to see the band suddenly split into a squad of comic book oddities. Did you know? The Impossibles actually shared a half-hour block with Frankenstein Jr., a giant robot show, creating a mix of rock music, sci-fi, and superhero parody all in one place. Hanna-Barbera was clearly experimenting, and while the show only lasted 2 years, its bizarre blend of genres made it a cult curiosity. Looking back, The Impossibles was more than a kid's show. It was a time capsule of the 1960s obsession with bands, heroes, and fast-changing pop culture. It didn't need to make sense. It just needed to swing. The Beagles. Now picture this. It's the height of Beatlemania. The British invasion has taken over the airwaves, and America can't get enough. So what do television executives do? They launched The Beagles, a cartoon about two anthropomorphic dogs in a rock band. Yes, you heard that right. Charles and Scooty were the animated duo, loosely based on musical stereotypes of the time. One was serious, the other goofy. They strummed guitars, sang catchy tunes, and got into light-hearted adventures, all while winking at the global obsession with the Beatles. But here's where it gets strange. Unlike most fictional TV bands, the Beagles had real-world crossover. Their songs were released as actual records, making them one of the first cartoon bands to blur the line between fiction and reality. A few of their tracks even hit the Billboard charts, though briefly. The show itself didn't last long, just one season in 1966. But it's remembered as a quirky experiment. The designs were oddly angular, the humor broad, and the concept itself, well, it spoke to just how deep Beatlemania had burrowed into American culture. When even Saturday morning cartoons were cashing in with dog stand-ins, you knew the craze had reached its peak. Did you know? For years, episodes of The Beagles were thought lost after the production studio changed hands. Fans assumed the show had vanished forever. Then, in the 2000s, old reels were rediscovered in a forgotten warehouse, cementing its place as one of the great lost cartoons of the era. Looking back, The Beagles is less about music and more about marketing madness. It was the 1960s in a nutshell, a time when even animated dogs could ride the wave of a cultural revolution. Deputy Dog. Before the slick superheroes and psychedelic spies, there was Deputy Dog, a slow-talking canine lawman who kept order in a sleepy southern town. Debuting in 1960, the show followed this hound in a sheriff's hat as he patrolled bayous, cotton fields, and swamps, always accompanied by his sidekicks, Muskie Muskrat and Vince the Mole. The oddity wasn't just the setting, it was the pacing. Where most cartoons bounced with energy, Deputy Dog moved with a lazy drawl. Episodes drifted like a summer afternoon, with Dog bumbling through situations at half speed while Critters outsmarted him. It felt less like a chase and more like a porch-side tale, complete with thick accents and swampy atmosphere. Did you know? The show was originally created for syndication, and its regional charm resonated especially in the American South. In fact, its Deputy Dog Time became a catchphrase for kids who loved its offbeat humor. But here's the twist. While it seemed simple, Deputy Dog was slyly inventive. Episodes featured bizarre wildlife antics, surreal rural gags, and a lawman who never quite managed to control his territory. He was less about justice and more about comedic timing, which made him stand out among faster-paced cartoons of the era. Looking back, Deputy Dog was part cartoon, part cultural snapshot. A lawman who always lagged a step behind, wrapped in molasses pacing and swampy charm. Strange? Absolutely, but unforgettable. Zorak. And then there was Zorak. First appearing in 1966's Space Ghost, Zorak was a giant green mantis with an evil cackle, a taste for destruction, and a knack for being the ultimate Saturday morning villain. Unlike many goofy antagonists of the time, Zorak had presence. He was menacing, bug-eyed, and relentless in his attempts to defeat Space Ghost and his teen sidekicks. His insectoid design, with jagged limbs and sinister sneer, made him look straight out of a child's nightmare, and that was exactly the point. But here's where it gets fascinating. Decades later, Zorak was resurrected for Space Ghost Coast to Coast, where he was reimagined as a sarcastic, deadpan bandleader mocking the very hero he once tried to destroy. That revival turned him into a cult icon, but it also cast a long shadow back on his original role. Watching those early episodes now, you can't help but see the seeds of his later sardonic personality hiding under the menace. Did you know? Zorak was originally designed to be even scarier, but animators toned him down for fear of spooking kids. Even so, he stood out among Hanna-Barbera's gallery of brightly colored villains. He wasn't goofy like Dick Dastardly or bumbling like Dr. Madcap. He was pure insect menace. Looking back, Zorak is a reminder that even in a decade of wacky characters, there was room for true villainy. A mantis in space armor, strange, sinister, and unforgettable. So there you have it. 10 of the weirdest cartoon characters the 1960s ever unleashed. Aliens in bedrock, monster marshmallows, superhero bugs, and rock and roll dogs. Each one a reminder that animation was never afraid to get weird, wild, and wonderfully experimental. Which one do you remember? Or better yet, which one made you wonder if you dreamed it up? Drop your answer in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stay tuned, because the next reel of Hollywood Secrets is just getting started.